Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. I'm Brian Doyle and I'm excited to have you join us today. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce our guest, Frank Raimondi from Nodeware, a part of IGI Global. And Frank and I have gotten to know each other really well over the course of the last years. We've done some interesting things together, besides being part of Pitch It, which you guys have heard enough about that story. But Frank,
one more time. Come on, Brian. One more time.
I think our audience has heard enough Pitch It conversation for a lifetime. But that is where I got a real good insight into what Nodeware does, what Frank and his team are bringing to market. And I asked him to come on board today to obviously share a little bit about his background, as we always do, but to have a conversation on really what the difference is between penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, and how that all kind of weaves into the assessment process for validation. So welcome, Frank. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and appreciate the time and appreciate the partnership. It has been great to, kind of learn about each other and get to know and work together. I especially appreciate, and this kind of goes into my intro, the value of a partnership and the value of, one of my mottos, if you will, has been, the 1 + 1 needs to equal 3 if it's worth doing. And so, or a win-win if it has to be a win-win. So, yeah. As I said, I'm with IGI Infinite Group Inc., company out of Rochester, New York, and we've been around 20 plus years, 30, actually, the origins of the company are almost 40 years old, but in cybersecurity and services and software world about the last 20 years. So a lot of experience in there. And what I came on board a couple of years ago was to kind of start looking at the channel. They had been sort of channel relevant, if you will, or channel introduced, but not really fully engaged. So I've come on a little over 2 years ago. Matthew Koenig came on about a year ago, kind of building up our presence and our participation and our value add to the channels and MSPs in particular. I've been around maybe too long. I don't know.
I think we can both be accused of that some days, Frank.
We've been around in channels with mostly on the vendor side. Started some consulting and did some worked at Apple Computer for a good number of years, and then worked at Intel for almost 20 years, and been always around channels and partners and sort of trying to provide value from what we do, and that really started with Intel. Intel's a processor, right? It's one component out of 10 or 20 in a PC, and it was driving those partnerships and the alliances, and how we got the CPU, you got the motherboard, you got the OS, you got the chat. I mean, all these pieces need to work together for the common good of making a better system. And so that's kind of really built into my brain and my modus operandi, if you will, from how I like to work with companies such as VCL Toolbox and others that we're partnering with today.
Yeah, it's amazing how this is really an ecosystem industry, right? All of our products tend to complement other areas. None of us can be experts in everything that an MSP needs in the stack. So It really gives us the ability to, forge some better relationships out there and really, find the synergies, between our companies. I hate that word, but we're going to use it anyway today and do that. But, with that being said, Frank, it must have been a bit of a change, culture shock for you, though, going from the corporate world into a service provider world. There's a lot of structured operation on that corporate side.
Not only that was kind of a little bit of a gradual transition as when I left Intel in 2016 and did about 5 years of consulting, a wide range of things. So you kind of got out of the big world, and as you see from those companies, the biggest change for me has been from was very much a hardware focused guy, right? From CPUs to Macs to printer, and so learning the software world has been the most, oh my God, what, how much, it's just all these different things that learn. And then that transition as well, specifically to the MSP world, as MSPs or resellers, if you will, of ours were transitioning into MSPs. I was kind of making that same transition. So I understood a lot of what they were coming from and their struggles of what they were trying to deliver. So it's been an interesting learning curve, let's say.
It's funny you bring that up like that too, because I think that would be an interesting conversation if we got a bunch of our vendor cronies and it's like, what was the biggest transition hurdle for you when you came to this side, right?
Yeah.
Even though you came from the vendor world, your transition was the software side. Me, I was an MSP, we were selling services, and I really realized services sales and software sales are totally different and require, different approach models. And it's an interesting thing, and I know, a lot of our listeners are folks that transition from the MSP world into the vendor world. And,
Right.
that would be a curious question, post in
I like that.
comments, so to speak, of what you think of that.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little, let's shift gears a little bit now and really get into the heart of what we were going to talk about today. And that is, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace of what's a penetration test, what's a vulnerability scan, are they the same? You see some of these automated penetration testing tools, and how does that vary from more of a human-based and machine-based approach to it? So obviously IGI has a lot of experience in that, and maybe you can help the listeners understand a little bit, what's the difference between those two items?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think there's actually probably three elements to consider differentiating, and two of them are clearly a role and a duty almost that an MSP should do, and the third is something that they should absolutely not do. So if we the first two, the one that probably most people are familiar with, right, is a vulnerability assessment. For years, MSPs probably have had to do one for maybe half their customers or a third of their customers, right? It was a checklist item once a year. Hey, I need a report that shows what my inventory is and what my systems are and how risky they might be, and what kind of patches are needed, right? It was kind of just an internal check of what was done, and literally it was that checkbox, right? It was something they could easily deliver. So there was various tools out there that could do that, from even from some network management tools to vulnerability programs like ours, like Nodeware, or rapid fire tools, or the Nessus and Connect, Qualys of the world. So that's sort of the first piece, right? Which is clearly a one-time snapshot internal view of what's there. Okay, so that's a vulnerability assessment. Now the next play is really kind of the vulnerability management, which is sort of doing that same kind of assessment of the inventory and the vulnerabilities and the things that you're finding that are at risk within your environment, but doing it on a regular basis. Right. And what we recommend and what insurance companies and compliance world is starting to require is that it's truly continuous, right? That you're not doing it once a month or, God forbid, once a year, right? You're doing it continuously, and you're not only monitoring, but you have a program and a management program to actually actively address the things you're finding, right? So that's sort of the next. And that is a lot more complicated. It takes a lot more discipline to identify things, especially if new critical vulnerabilities, whether it's like the ConnectWise one that came up the other day, or ones from Microsoft that come up all the time. Those are identified, and normally the MSP or the IT shop internally has to go, okay, here's the CVE. I gotta go find it. How do I figure out, how do I patch it? What do I need to do? And the automation of that is what, I don't mean to be too pluggy here on the product, but that's what a Nodeware product can do, right? Is that we can identify it and provide the recipe or the relationship of what needs to be done, right? The remediation steps.
And that's critical because, one of the things, Frank, that I see is exactly what you're talking about. A vulnerability today might not be a vulnerability tomorrow, and vice versa. And that concept of doing the annual or even a quarterly review for vulnerability can leave somebody exposed for quite a period of time. Think about the Screen Connect issue that came up the other day. It came up, everybody's addressing it, and hopefully in a week, it's pretty much got a bow on it, right? And if you're only doing it once a year, you might have missed that entire event.
Absolutely. No, that really is a critical component of that management. So, and we'll come back to that a little bit. But let me sort of describe the third piece of this role is the penetration test.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think of the vulnerability assessment and management as the internal look, you know what you've got, you're evaluating, you're trying to protect what you have and minimize the risk surfaces, the risk attack elements. Penetration test is really something that has to be done, but in the majority of cases, it should absolutely be done by an outside third party. Right? You can't have the MSP checking their own work and providing a report that says, yes, I've done great and we're all good. Right? It really needs to be an external third party source. And because it acts very differently than assessments and management, it's really an ethical hacker, right? It's somebody, the white hat guy, coming in and trying to break into your system, right? Finding avenues around and looking for those interdependencies that you might not see from an internal vulnerability tool, but you are looking and you're able to see that from externally. And okay, well, this is here, and that means that's there. Then that means that point there is available, and that's what the penetration test can do. So think about it as somebody testing the system. Now and there are different types of penetration testers. There's baseline, which is really just kind of an automated, if you will, or electronic attack into the system, and then there's a comprehensive, which is more a real person trying to do different things and hack in. So there's ranges, and they're priced differently based on the number of external sort of sites that need to be tested and internal. And but a quality penetration test is not just hey, let's try and attack and see what we get. It's really a quality one needs to have a full report, sort of recommendations, analysis of what they found, and really kind of providing that value add. So, they can be cheap, if you will, but you kind of get what you pay for. So, the advice and the cautionary tale is to, know what your customer really needs. I mean, ultimately, that's what you have to look at, and what are their reporting requirements? What are their compliance requirements? What are they going up for? If it's CMMC, or are they going for some other qualification that they better cyber insurance rates, anything along those lines. So we kind of look at, that's kind of the penetration test. So,
and let's expand on that though, because something came to mind for me when you were talking there. How would an MSP be able to identify who might need a baseline, who might need a comprehensive scan? Really, that's probably a question on the table, because most of the customers are going to go, oh, I can do a baseline and satisfy my requirement, and that's going to cost less. Well, that's good enough for me. But really, what are some of the differentiators that tell you, yeah, baseline will be sufficient, but comprehensive is what you need?
Yeah, no, it's really kind of a consultative approach to answer that. It's not these three things are present, you need this, right? Yeah. Or that. So we, our services side, we'll get a request from a partner and say, hey, my customer needs a pen test. Okay, well, how many systems? What are they looking for? What do they need to get out of it? What's this report need to say? I mean, not that they're going to tell them what to put in it, but what does it need to report out on, and what does it need to provide? And so that's really more of a question. But I mean, at a highest level, a baseline really is just sort of an easy, relatively easy pass into the system, into the network, and see what it can crawl around and dig out. And sometimes that's going to be just fine, right? I mean, in a lot of cases, that is just fine for what they're looking for.
If the systems aren't mission critical, high PII, or that type of information,
right.
I'm sure that you can get away with that piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. And us or any other penetration test provider is going to be able to walk you through what that needs to be, and get you what you need without crazy. Because you can get, we have a starting entry level price of a penetration test of $3,500 for 5 externals and up to 250 internals. But a penetration test, as you say, in a highly regulated or lots of detailed information, that can be, depending on the size, could be $50,000 or $100,000, right? So, the good news is the MSP doesn't have to do hardly anything. They just have to set it up, order it, and pay the provider for it, and do some markup and get out of the way.
Yeah, and I think the critical value add you just talked about there, though, is getting that remediation information as well, because just knowing where the door's unlocked isn't going to help you if you can't figure out how to lock it, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things that we've that I think are sort of the back and forth of what you need and when you need it. What we've seen a lot of partners do is start with, they know they need to do a penetration test, or their customer needs one within 3 months. Let's say, by the end of the year or by the end of the quarter, they have to have this done. So what vulnerability management can do in the meantime is kind of prepare you for that test, right? And kind of get you prepped, get you knowing what your vulnerabilities are, reduce those interdependencies within the system that a penetration test is going to find. So it's kind of in a certain way, it's a preparation to not fail your pen test, right? In certain ways. So that's a good sort of process thing. The other standpoint is if you do a pen test, okay, customer says, I need a pen test on March 1st, and let's see what it says. So you do that, you get the report back, you work through with the customer, and you identify the priorities and who's going to do what. Well, that's great, but if your next penetration test isn't for 6 months or a year out, you need to make sure that the work that you've been identified is being worked on, right? So that's where penetration tests as a starting point is followed up by vulnerability management, right? That you're continuously looking for things, you're checking your work, right? You found this vulnerability in the penetration test, you did it, and when you run the test the next day on the vulnerability scan, oh, great, that's not there anymore. That vulnerability's been eliminated. Great, check that work task off, right? So they can be a really good one to punch either direction, and then once you get it going, right, then your penetration test is going to come out a lot better, right? If you're proactively managing your vulnerabilities in the platform, and part of that simplistically, right, is knowing what you have, right? What is on that network, right? Both in the physical network, right? And this is where, a good vulnerability management tool like Nodeware comes in handy, where we have agents that are also, capturing every remote worker today, right? You don't know, they never come into the office. You don't, if you don't have access into seeing what that system's vulnerabilities are, there's all kinds of ways through that device to get into the network and cause problems. So you got it's really holistic back and forth between this vulnerability management and penetration tests, and we can there's lots of consultants, a lot of expertise in this area. If you've got a CISO engaged, or if you're working with one, that's again where they can help you as the MSP, or maybe you as the MSP can provide that guidance if you have the right knowledge set there. But that's where the strategy comes into play, and sort of understanding none of these things should ever be a one-time hit, right?
Yeah.
Today's world, you cannot live on a once-a-year report and hope nothing happens in the next year. You just can't do that.
Cyber threats emerge every day. You've got to know where those vulnerabilities are coming, and our machines our systems are becoming so much more complex too, even though, to the end user, a lot of it's browser based, right? But the reality is there's so much going on out there. You do need to keep a continual view on things. And, that kind of probably dovetails us into the next concept, which is, okay, you're using it on the front line to make sure that you're staying in front of problems, but it also serves a purpose in validating, in certifying what you've done as well. And you've kind of touched upon that a little bit. But when we talk about those that are regulatory based, how can vulnerability and pen tests really help them get those certifications that a company might be looking for?
Well, I mean, simplistically, in more and more cases, they cannot get that certification without having an active vulnerability management program, right? So it's almost I mean, to call it a silly question, but it's almost a silly question, right? In that in some environments, it's not a, if you do this, you might get that. It's, you will do this or you will not get that.
So. And we teed it up as a silly question because unfortunately, sometimes it's overlooked, right? We're seeing it coming into cyber liability. We're seeing it come into every one of the different frameworks that are out there. But the good news is if you undertake these tests, you've got the evidence you need to satisfy those auditors. Or if you're making a claim to get paid, right? Because those are some of the bigger challenges that are happening out there. People... I won't call it falsifying because sometimes they're doing it genuinely, right? There's always an element of folks that are doing it fraudulently, but a lot of folks just don't know what they're really saying when they're doing these cyber liability applications, and they can't moving into those gaps.
No, that's a perfect lead in. So one of our partners is Data Stream Insurance, right? Who's a MSP friendly, or they're basically a broker for cyber insurance. And what we're working on with them is to help the MSP better the application, right? Because if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. They're going to get a terrible rate, or they might not even get insured. So what we're working with them on is enabling the MSP to use a report like a vulnerability management report, an executive summary from that output from Nodeware as an example, and take that report, include it in the application that says, "Hey, Mr. Insurance Carrier, we are doing active and proactive vulnerability management. Here's a score. Here's our report that shows, what we've done and what our score is as of yesterday, blah, blah, blah." Right. And so the carriers are now being able to look at that and say, this guy's, they're doing the proactive, they're working for things. And we've seen, this is not a guarantee yet, but we've seen where that has resulted in lower premiums for the end user. Right. So again, carriers don't want to pay out. If they know you're doing something well and you're reducing their risk of having to pay out on a claim, they're going to give you a lower rate in the front end. So, again, that's sort of the development of where the importance of this information is going to enable, just it's so silly that it's not silly. It's not the right word. There's such basic blocking and tackling here that it just makes sense, right? It's the more you can look at things proactively. Again, as you said, all these things, is the acceleration of threats. I mean, God forbid the whole discussion on AI and what that means into the world of cyber and the risks there. I don't think that's not even scratched the surface yet. So nope. Yeah, so this is really the current and the insurance world, right? It goes back to the seatbelt requirements and airbags, right? The car manufacturers didn't want to put those in; it was extra cost. But when the insurance company saw, hey, we put those in, that means fewer people get hurt, and that means we pay out less. Boom, let's make it a requirement. Same thing's going to happen here, if not already.
And it really talks also to the fact that you got to protect yourself against attacks for a variety of reasons as well, right? Because, we think about our loss of data as kind of one of the primary concepts here. But, as we're talking and recording this today, all the cellular carriers are having a bunch of issues, right? Now, that could be as simple as somebody made a misconfiguration yesterday, forgot to put right mem at the end, as some of my guys used to do. It could, and there's an attack that's just looking to disable service, where there's other ones that are coming for your data. So, having this information and understanding where the vulnerability is and what it's potentially in front of is going to also make sure that, we all think about breach from a loss of data in financial standpoint, but what if it's just loss of service, right? Like the old denial of service attacks, something that just disrupts how you do things. That's a problem as well. And, these scans can help you prepare for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little off topic, but it's something that's in today's news, right?
Yeah. No, and I think, I'll give a little bit of plug, but I think tools like the VCL Toolbox that are enabling the MSP to provide that value to their customer, right? And make it easy for them because, let's face it, right? They've got so many things going on. We've had a lot of partners that they love Nodeware. They're ready. They rolled it out to a couple of customers because they really needed to, but they're worried about the extra work it provides when they start seeing things. And so, we've tried to, help with prioritizations and just understanding that ignorance is not a defense, right? So even if you, you need to kind of really, again, this just back to being proactive and work at things and not just wait until it's too late.
But it does also speak to the fact that Nodeware, while doing a great job at what it does, is only one part of a multi-layered approach to security, right? And
Exactly.
what we're trying to accomplish, not to go into any kind of infomercial though, is helping the vCISO manage the security program and making sure all this information is coming in and being correlated appropriately, so you can identify where those gaps might be. And yeah, well, by the way, we help with regulatory frameworks and certification, but it's really how do we bring all this information into a central place to make sure that we're not missing spots and correlating that data appropriately on the daily.
No, that's hugely important. So applaud you guys for what you're doing there. That's great.
Yeah. And, for the MSPs out there, these are huge opportunities, right? It's really easy to plug a Nodeware into your security stack, but take it to the new revenue opportunities, right? We're all looking for new ways to build revenue. And if you can get adept at managing your customer cyber programs, helping them with cyber liability insurance, delivering these services in a way that makes sense to them and better protects them, you talk about stickiness. That's where you're really going to build that relationship with your customer.
Well, and you just extend that to offering a pen test, right? If you're doing the right things and you're proud of what you've done and you deliver a quality service, there should be no hesitation to offer a penetration test to your customer and say, hey, you're going to need this for X, Y, or Z requirement. I've got a partner that is an external partner that will come in and test the network. It's not me saying it's great; it's them saying it's great. Let's get it done, right? And again, it's not going to be a huge margin play, but it's a stickiness factor, right? You're going to get.
I think I like the validation play there, right? If a customer, if you're an MSP, and when you talk about some of those baseline numbers, Frank, and again, I don't want to put that number as an absolute there, but that's something you can very easily weave into your contract and include that as a one-time event from an outside third party. And if you're validating yourself each year, you're reducing the risk of retention issues, right? So, there's a lot of cross plays in the customer or the client management side to getting these security tools in. But if you're confident, as you said, Frank, leveraging them in a way that you can validate what you're doing without having to thump your chest, look at all the tickets we closed or whatever else that we want to do from a performance metric standpoint.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Awesome. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, Frank. So, what I want to ask you is if you have any closing thoughts.
Oh, closing thoughts. I kind of comes back to a bit of, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt out there about what you should do and when you should do it and what's the first step, or I've got this tool, kind of does that, but I want to kind of go back to a little bit of the basics really of a cyber hygiene program, and we've done some partnerships and integrations and just discussing with the world around the four, I call them the key four pillars of cyber hygiene, and these are really the proactive employee engagement elements of a cyber program that really should be required. And again, back to these insurance and compliance requirements, they're all in that mix. So first piece is security awareness training. Right, there's lots of options there. That's an easy add-on into a program. You got MFA, right, is an absolute piece that has to be in there, and you're not going to get insured if you don't have an MFA program across the board. Yep. Email security, right, sort of from Vade or Mail Protector, a bunch of others. They're again in the proactive element where the customer, where the end user is touching and accessing things to minimize their risk. And then the fourth is vulnerability management, right? That continuous playing around it. So I think, looking at those elements and then understanding, again, it's a bit of the question in Q&A with the customer and where they're at, what they need to do, understand their business and what requirements are either there now or coming down the line soon enough.
Yeah. Well, Frank, really appreciate you coming on board. It's always been great working with you and the entire team over at IGI and Nodeware, and I'm looking forward to the things that we do this year as well.
Absolutely.
Some great stuff going on.
Absolutely.
Tell everybody where you're going to be in the near term. Where can they come see Nodeware?
Yeah, so my colleague Matthew will be at Channel Partners Expo in a couple weeks in Vegas. That same week, I'll be in Chicago for the CompTIA Communities and Councils Forum. And then we'll be at Kaseya Connect, and we'll be a couple different places. Nodeware.com/events if you want to kind of see where we're going to be. That both some webinars that we do as well as just events that we'll be at. So yeah, no, and we just launched our brand new website yesterday, Nodeware.com. If people want to take a look at that and see, just get the latest information, and there's some great information there to kind of find out how to get do a demo or just get some information that gets you started.
Great stuff. Well, in addition to that, Frank, we're going to be including your link to LinkedIn so people can connect with you as part of the show notes. And as everybody knows, you can get this podcast at anywhere you download your podcast or up on YouTube if you want to see the visual format of things. Frank, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Brian.
Look forward to talking to you again soon, man.
All right, we'll see you around the channel.
That's it. Take care, buddy.